the Nonprofit Podcast, powered by DonorBox.
Crafting compelling narratives is an essential skill for effective nonprofit leaders, founders, and fundraisers, and for anyone committed to making a positive impact. Ethical storytelling plays a pivotal role in conveying the mission and values of your organization. Have you ever wondered how you can weave stories that not only captivate, but also inspire action and do it really well? Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Cara. I'm a nonprofit leader and fundraiser, and I have the honor of serving as podcast correspondent for DonorBox. We're here each week with practical actions you can use today to increase donations and take your nonprofit to the next level tomorrow. I recently read a terrific report from MemoryFox on the art of ethical storytelling, and it provided some really great data. And today we welcome back Carly Euler to the Nonprofit Podcast. She has some actionable insights to authentically connect with your audience, drive engagement, and elevate your nonprofit's impact. Welcome, Carly. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back.
Well, good. I am too, and I really want to learn so much from you today. I'm just starting out as a nonprofit leader, and I'm working with some vulnerable communities. We have some individuals and families who turn to our community center for much needed support each week. And so my ability to connect with supporters and raise money really depends on the ability to tell stories of impact that are moving. And I'm learning more and more about the value of storytelling. I've learned a lot from you guys at MemoryFox to really convey that impact and show supporters the value of their contributions. But I worry, story collection might inadvertently harm my community. And so I was really grateful to receive a copy of your new report on ethical storytelling. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit more about that today.
I am so excited to talk about this. This is something I've been working on for months, and it's felt like this little secret that I've been keeping. And now I'm so excited to share the secret with everybody.
All right, let's do it. So my first question for you. So how can we as nonprofits do a better job with storytelling without harming the communities we aim to support?
Yeah, so I love that we're starting off with this question. The big thing here is, like you just said, you're back to working at a nonprofit, and nonprofit leaders like yourself, they're really in a very tough position, just like you explained. The studies have shown that fundraising campaigns that include videos receive 114% more funds than those that do not. And obviously, that's what we do here at MemoryFox, right? Like, we just want to empower people to tell better stories, especially through the power of video. But we also all got into the nonprofit business because we want to help people, and we certainly don't want to harm people while we're trying to tell their stories. So really, the last thing that you want to do is make your community feel exploited or re-traumatized simply by telling the story that you sort of need to raise more money. And at MemoryFox, we knew that this was a problem. We kept hearing people asking us these sorts of questions, the feelings that you've already mentioned yourself. But we really wanted to take the sector's temperature on this, and that's why we decided to make a report. Interestingly enough, the biggest thing that we found in our report was that 58% of the respondents to our survey, they admitted that they actually struggle with collecting stories that do no harm to their community.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Because, we gave them this big, long list, and I said, just please check everything that applies to you. What are you feeling this year? And that was the number one thing that they checked off. And I think that, I'm not sure I'm shocked by that, but I think it's important to put a number behind it so we all can really rally behind it and try to do a little better. So in terms of your actual question, there are so many people who are doing really great work on this. I'm certainly not an expert, but I am learning every single day. But we have, lots of great people in the space like Maria Bryan or Marshall Stowell. Like, they're doing these amazing studies and they're doing trainings all the time. Many of them are free. But I will say that in terms of actual boots on the ground nonprofit work, it really starts within, and it starts with building a culture of ethical storytelling at your nonprofit. You can do that, just by using inclusive language, trauma-informed language, and really committing to it as an organization. That's where you're going to start, and that's where you're really going to be able to start telling more stories from the outside as well.
I love that. Stories are compelling, right? You just shared with me the statistic that it helps fundraising campaigns just deliver, connects with the supporters that way. A lot of that's emotional. So how can I emotionally connect with my audience without exploiting the pain of those we serve? We talked about it's important, but how do I do it?
Definitely. So I want to just touch on the point that when we talk about emotions, a lot of times we're thinking about specific emotions. We're thinking about despair, anger, maybe sadness. But I think it's really important to remember that there is a whole spectrum of emotions that we can talk about, and they don't have to be negatively charged. So I always like to recommend that people talk about hope and relief. I have a story a little bit out of left field, but I promise that it makes sense. So stay with me.
Yeah, let's do it. I want to hear it.
Okay, so in the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was all these reality shows that were about extreme makeovers, right? You know, people were getting their full wardrobes redone. They were getting their houses bulldozed over. They were getting their basements all cleared out of all of their things. And it was this theory like, well, if we just do these big transformations, these people will have better lives, right? I mean, they were everywhere. People love these shows. And I'm a reality TV junkie, so like I watched them all and I did love them. But now, you know, we're about 20 years out of all of those people who experience those things. And more you hear people coming out of the woodwork saying, you know, that actually didn't help me that much. It actually made my life not more positive. I wouldn't say necessarily for the worse, but it definitely did not make it for the better. A lot of people, you know, they're saying the house you built me, it made the taxes go up. It became, I couldn't pay for it. I had to move. Maybe you took away a portion of my identity when you threw out all of the clothes that I preferred to wear. There's a lot of things that are coming out about these big transformational changes that we felt like, look at this good we're doing, that maybe it didn't end up being so good. So let me get that back to the nonprofit space, right? So we all work in nonprofits, and a lot of our missions, they have to do with small changes that end up making a big change in society or in our community. And I think when you focus on things like hope or relief, those are maybe small emotions at the time, but they really lead to big changes. So if you're writing a story about hope, about a family, suddenly they felt hope because of the type of service you provided them, what you're actually telling your donor is, this nonprofit provides a future for our community. And when you invest your money into this nonprofit, that is going to be the key to long-term success. And similarly with relief, what you're thinking about is, you know, when you're showing the emotion that somebody is feeling relieved after the services that you gave them, maybe a support group of some sort, or, you know, maybe you helped give them some sort of service they didn't have access to before, that's just going to make their lives easier. And it's actually just going to make your donors feel relieved as well, that their money is actually solving a problem that needs to be solved.
And being able to collect those stories can be difficult, though, to ask someone to share a little bit about themselves to a broader audience. It's a little different when I'm asking them one-on-one what their story is. This happened to me. This happened Tuesday night. I met a couple. They were really thankful. It was the first time that they had accessed the services. They said, hey, we want to say thank you. And I listened to their story and I said, can I tell it? And they're like, no, this is our story to tell. So how do you walk that line between collecting consent from those who lend us their stories and still being able to share that transformation, share that hope, share that relief?
Yeah, so consent is something we take very seriously here at Memory Fox. And it's something that, especially in this report, I learned a ton more about that I was even unaware of. So I would say I kind of broke it down into really 3 key things I would say when it comes to consent. So number 1, you really need to be upfront about how you intend to use their story and what identifying information you are planning to use. So I say that because that couple you talked to, okay, so you got this great story and maybe they're not ready to share that on your social channels, you know, for everyone in their communities to see. But you know, maybe that could be an example of, well, I have a grant report coming up and this is only going to be read by somebody who is going to be reading the grant application, and I won't share the story anywhere else, but it might help me secure this type of funding. I don't know if that might be the case, but that's just sort of one example of, well, maybe if you're very honest about how you plan to use the story, then people might feel more compelled to share certain aspects or even have certain identifying factors included that would be a stronger story for you. But then number 2, I would say really, and it sounds like this is exactly what you're doing, I would prioritize getting the written consent up front. And that can be electronic, but you really don't want to hinge on verbal agreements as something that is binding. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, you know, but it also really helps just make sure that your nonprofit also is not liable for anything in the future. I know that's kind of a strange way to think about it, but it is just good to have, you know, something, a checkbox that was definitely checked, like, yes, it is okay. And then my third thing I would recommend, and this is kind of something that is sort of new to me and that we're going to start implementing here at Memory Fox, but first you want to make sure that the storyteller is aware that they can retract their consent at any time. So that's something you want to let them know up front. But then we're recommending now that organizations check in regularly to make sure that the consent remains. So if you tend to use that story maybe a year after you collected it, maybe it's a good time to make a phone call and just make sure that they still are comfortable with what you wrote. Because even if someone agreed to it at one point, things live on the internet forever and maybe they change their mind.
Mm-hmm. And when they say no, that story needs to come down to really act on that quickly to honor the value that they've given you and the trust that they have in your nonprofit, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you for those 3 tips. You mentioned different levels of consent. So posting things on social media might be a little different than putting it in a grant report or something similar. As a nonprofit, there's a lot of pressure to post on social media regularly. How do you share hard stories in social media, which is often a lighthearted platform or communication channel?
So I would say when it comes to social media, like you're saying, you need to post a lot of stories. You kind of need to have a lot of content. And you're right. You don't always want it to be, sad or despair or any of those other more negative feelings. One tactic that I like to recommend, especially for getting more stories, is to remember that you, the nonprofit professional, are also a storyteller as well. And you have a whole other community that is hopefully open to telling stories. That can include your fellow staff members, your board members, your volunteers, or your donors. It's really a little bit old-fashioned, I believe, to just rely on program participants to give stories and have that be your only source. I think we're seeing more and more people want to hear what the volunteers are having to say or what your donors are having to say about why they gave.
Yeah, we often say that we're a big community. It's not just those we serve. It's those who show up every week to volunteer. It's the donors who support makes it happen. It's the staff members, the program staff members who are there working so diligently. It's a community. Showcase the community. I love that aspect of it. It's very engaging for sure. And people like to see themselves on social media and they'll share it out with their friends and expand the network, hopefully.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Love that. Okay, let's talk about video storytelling. That's what Memory Fox does and does really well. What are your thoughts about some good ways to tell compelling stories about disadvantaged populations in particular that if they're unwilling or unable to be featured on camera?
Yes. So I definitely want to recognize that some nonprofits serve communities that simply cannot be on camera. Maybe they are uncomfortable, but in some extreme cases, it's a safety issue. So I really do just want to mention that and hold space for that. I think that's really important. And we certainly would never want to ask people to share a story that might cause them a personal harm in any way. But like you mentioned, I do actually have a couple strategies that I've, again, learned pretty recently about how you can share a story that doesn't have somebody on camera. So first, I did this for our holiday video, but you can just record a voiceover testimonial. Like I said before, you can be the story, you don't have to be the person on camera either, but you could, if you have a written testimonial available to you that you do have consent to use, I would recommend doing a voiceover and making that into a video. It's really okay that it's your voice. It doesn't have to be the person who actually wrote the story. Second, I would say composite stories are really powerful for people. So a composite story is actually something that you would write down or that you would share that actually involves several people's stories. It has aspects of many different people's stories that kind of represent an example of somebody you might serve. So it's really not just one person's story, and therefore you're not targeting them, you're not making any identifying factors about one person, but you still are showing an accurate story because it is an example of the types of people that you serve. And then finally, I love this suggestion, and this is one that is written about in the report quite a few times, but telling the story of an object. So some examples that I recently heard about: a food bank telling the story of the food delivery truck. They took a video of looking out the front windshield, doing their little drive, talking about all the hard work the delivery truck has to do in order to serve how many people across how many miles. I mean, what an interesting way for people to truly put themselves into an object, but also put themselves into your mission and action. Some other examples might be if you are building houses, maybe you tell the story of the hammer, Or if you are working at a school program that serves lunches, maybe you're the brown paper bag. Something like that can be just very compelling by humanizing an object and still getting the point across of what your mission is.
Very creative. I really hadn't thought of a few of those. I think that's really neat. Okay, as a storyteller, as I'm trying to put content together every single week, maybe multiple times a week, what do you do if as you're writing or as you're prepping your material, you find yourself wondering if what you're sharing might be exploitative?
So I just think a good rule of thumb is that if it feels icky, it probably is. And I love that more people, great people like you, more people, that are thinking about these topics are the ones in the storyteller role at this point, and that we're actually having tough conversations about this topic and actually questioning some of our old practices. I think there's absolutely no harm in taking some time to reevaluate, sending your story to somebody else for their perspective, maybe take some time to refocus later, or seek additional resources or training like some of the ones I mentioned before. I think sometimes we get worried about, well, I have a deadline to hit and I really just need to get this out and I don't have time to learn. But I would really challenge that and say that there is no deadline that's more important than making your community feel like you're a good steward of their stories.
Yeah, that just lends to trust all around. And trust means more donor support. It means communities that are willing to come to you because they feel safe where you are. And I appreciate that so much.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that it's okay to be upfront and just say, this didn't feel right to me. And maybe here's why. Or this didn't feel right to me. And instead, I'd like to go in a different direction.
So Carly, I devoured this report on ethical storytelling. It's chocked full of terrific information. If somebody listening wanted to go find their own copy, where would they learn more about ethical storytelling and how can they get their own copy?
Well, I would love it if everybody listening would please go to memoryfox.io/ethical storytelling. You can find the report there as well as several other things that we're doing in terms of ethical storytelling throughout 2024. If you are not sure how to get to our website, hey, no problem. Follow us on LinkedIn, find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. We're everywhere. I would also just like to mention that we are starting a Narratives with Integrity series. So that is something we're going to be offering quarterly, and it's going to be a panel where we invite different people to talk about a specific topic that has to do with ethical storytelling. So I also invite all the listeners to save the date for March 13th. That's going to be our next panel. We're going to specifically talk about how to avoid stereotyping, whitewashing, and poverty porn when it comes to storytelling. So that's going to be wildly interesting and very useful.
And we'll be sure to link all that information. I'm going to get it from you right after we finish here, and we'll list it in the show notes for anyone who's interested in learning more. This is so valuable, Carly. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so glad you are here. You took time today. What a treat.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And just a special shout out to everyone who contributed to our ethical storytelling report. Like I said, I am personally not an expert on this. I'm learning alongside all of you, and I really just want to recognize all the people who have these great theories and strategies that they're willing to share with us.
Well, thank you. And thank you, our listeners, for choosing to spend your time today with the Nonprofit Podcast. I hope you've left with the confidence to take a small step today that will make a big difference tomorrow. Be sure to click the download button on your podcast player, then leave the Nonprofit Podcast a review or give it a thumbs up if you're listening to the Nonprofit Podcast on YouTube. Your review really is a great way to help others find us. You're here to help others, and we're here to help you. So until next time, stay inspired.
That warm feeling when you help someone, it's not just happiness, it's fulfillment. And we believe it should be available to everyone, from frontline heroes to first-time fundraisers. Our tools empower you to help others. This is our mission. This is DonorBox, helping you help others.